Daniel Carter never imagined his life could fracture so quietly, like a crack spreading through glass before the whole pane shatters. He and Lila had been married for 6 years, their home a cozy two-story on a tree-lined street in suburban Seattle. The living room smelled of cedar from the fireplace Daniel insisted on keeping lit in winter, and the kitchen counters were perpetually cluttered with his sketch pads and her half-read tech journals. They were a mismatched pair on paper. He, a 32-year-old freelance graphic designer with a scruffy beard and a habit of losing himself in doodles until dawn, and she, a 30-year-old coder with sharp cheekbones and a relentless drive, clawing her way up at Vortex Innovations. But they'd made it work, ever since college when they'd met over burnt coffee in a UW computer lab, her arguing algorithms with a professor while he sketched her profile in the margins of his notes. Their life was built on small, sacred rituals, Saturday hikes in the Cascades, where Lila would tease him for tripping over roots, Friday movie nights with takeout and a bottle of cheap wine, late-night talks about the family they'd have someday, a little girl with her eyes, a boy with his lopsided grin. Daniel clung to those moments, especially now, when Lila seemed to be drifting away. She'd been coming home later and later, her dark hair plastered with rain, her hazel eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Her phone buzzed incessantly, text she'd mute with a quick swipe, brushing off his questions with a distracted "it's just work." He didn't push, not at first. He knew her latest project at Vortex was a beast, an AI platform that could revolutionize their product line and, more importantly, catapult her into senior management. She'd talk about it sometimes, pacing the kitchen with a glass of wine, her voice electric as she described neural networks and boardroom pitches. "This is my shot, Dan," she'd say, and he'd nod, proud of the fire that had drawn him to her in the first place. But pride was thinning into worrying. She'd stopped joining him for movie nights, her spot on the couch growing cold. She'd dodge his hugs, muttering about deadlines, and her smiles, those rare, radiant ones, felt forced, like she was performing for him. That Thursday, the rain came down in sheets, drumming a restless rhythm against the windows. Daniel sprawled on the couch, scrolling through Netflix, the house too quiet without her. He missed her, the old Lila, who'd flop beside him with a bowl of popcorn and argue over whether Die Hard was a Christmas movie. On a whim, he decided to surprise her. He grabbed pad thai from their favorite hole-in-the-wall spot, the styrofoam containers warm against his chest, and drove through the storm to Vortex's headquarters downtown. The building loomed like a futuristic fortress, all glass and steel, its lobby aglow with neon blue accents that pulsed like a heartbeat. Pete, the grizzled security guard with a smoker's rasp, recognized him from past visits. Lila's birthday last year, when Daniel had brought cupcakes and waved him up to the 14th floor with a grunt. "She's still at it, huh?" Pete said, and Daniel forced a laugh. The elevator ride was slow, the hum of it buzzing in his ears. His stomach fluttered with a mix of nerves and anticipation. He pictured her face lighting up at the food, maybe stealing a kiss in the empty office, a stolen moment amid her chaos. The doors slid open, and he stepped into a dimly lit hallway, most desks abandoned this late. Then he heard her laugh, soft and unguarded, floating from a glass-walled conference room down the corridor. It stopped him cold. Lila didn't laugh like that anymore, not with him. He crept closer, peering through the transparent wall. There she was, bent over a tablet, her shoulder brushing against a man in a tailored suit. Ethan Voss, her boss, mid-40s, with silver-flecked hair and a jawline carved from marble. He exuded a quiet, commanding power. Their heads were tilted close, too close, their hands grazing as they pointed at the screen, her slim fingers, his manicured ones. She smiled, a real smile, not the tight-lipped mask she'd been wearing at home. Ethan said something low, and she laughed again, her hand lingering near his. Daniel's chest constricted, a hot, twisting ache spreading through him. The takeout felt like lead in his hands. He didn't call out. He didn't storm in, though part of him wanted to smash the glass and demand answers. Instead, he set the food on a random desk, the noodles probably cold by now, and turned back to the elevator. Rain soaked him as he stumbled to his car, the engine roaring to life as he peeled out of the lot. Her laugh echoed in his skull, louder than the storm. Was he paranoid? Had he misread it? Or had he just glimpsed the edge of something he couldn't unsee? He drove home, the wipers slashing through the downpour, and sat in the dark living room, waiting for her, wondering if she'd even notice he'd been there. Morning broke gray and heavy, the rain a steady tattoo against the windows. Daniel hadn't slept, his mind a treadmill of that moment. Lila and Ethan, the intimacy of their posture, her laugh cutting through him like a blade. He poured coffee, hands trembling, the mug clinking too loud against the counter. Lila shuffled into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, his old hoodie, faded and stretched, her dark hair a tangled mess. She looked pale, shadows pooling under her eyes, and she wouldn't meet his gaze as she reached for the coffee pot. "Who were you with last night?" he asked, keeping his voice low but firm, like he was testing the ice beneath him. She froze, mug halfway to her lips, then set it down with a sharp clink that echoed in the quiet. "Ethan," she said, too casual, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "We were finalizing the pitch." "Why? Didn't look like work to me," he said, sharper now, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "You were cozy." She rolled her eyes, but her fingers tightened around the mug until her knuckles whitened. "Daniel, don't start. This promotion means everything to me. Ethan's mentoring me, it's professional." Her tone was clipped, defensive, the way it got when she was cornered. He wanted to believe her, clung to the image of the Lila he knew, the one who'd stay up all night debugging code, her focus a laser, the one who dragged him to a coding boot camp just to prove she could teach better than the instructor. That fire had won him over, kept him tethered through every late night and canceled plan. But now it felt like it was scorching him. "Mentoring," he muttered, turning to rinse his mug in the sink, the water drowning out her sigh. She didn't follow him, didn't try to bridge the gap. The next few weeks were a slow bleed. Doubt piled up like unpaid bills, small, nagging clues he couldn't ignore. A diamond necklace appeared on her dresser one morning, delicate and sparkling, far too expensive for their budget. "It's a bonus," she said when he asked, her ears flushing red as she fumbled with the clasp. He pressed, "Since when did Vortex hand out jewelry?" But she snapped, "It's a thank you, okay? Drop it." Then there were the late-night calls she'd take in the garage, her voice a muffled hum through the door, too low for him to catch words. He'd stand there once, ear pressed to the wood, hating himself for it, until she emerged, startled, claiming it was a teammate with a coding snag. And the cologne woodsy, rich, nothing like the cheap stuff he wore clinging to her jacket when she stumbled in at 2 a.m., muttering about deadlines. He tried to talk, cornered her one evening as she scrolled her phone on the couch. "You okay, Lee? You've been distant." She barely looked up, thumbs flying over the screen. "I'm fine, Daniel. Just busy." "Drop it." The sharpness in her voice stung, and he retreated, the space between them widening. Then came the night that shattered everything. They sat over dinner, lasagna he'd spent hours on, her favorite, with extra ricotta the way she liked it. The kitchen smelled of garlic and tomato, but the meal sat cold on her plate, her fork tracing aimless patterns in the sauce. The silence was thick, oppressive, broken only by the drip of the faucet he'd been meaning to fix. She set her fork down, hands trembling, and looked at him, eyes brimming with tears that caught the dim light. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. His heart leapt, a wild, fleeting joy surging through him. "What? Lee?" Betsy stopped, the words dying as he saw her face. No smile, no spark, just dread, etched deep in the lines around her mouth. "Why don't you look happy?" "It's not yours," she whispered, so soft he almost missed it. The words slammed into him, a sledgehammer to the chest. The room tilted, his fork clattering to the table, sauce splattering the wood. "What do you mean, not mine?" "It's Ethan's," she said, voice breaking, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It wasn't planned, I swear. It just happened." He shouted, standing so fast the chair tipped back and crashed to the floor. "How does that just happen, Lila?" She flinched, wrapping her arms around herself like she could hold the pieces together. "He promised me the promotion," she said, shaking. "Said it'd secure our future, your future too. I didn't mean for this. Our future." His voice cracked, raw and ragged. "You slept with him for a job." "No," she cried, reaching for him across the table, her fingers brushing air as he pulled back. "It wasn't like that. I love you, Daniel. I got caught up. Ethan's powerful, persuasive. He's got this way of making you feel like you're the only one in the room, like every idea you have is gold. I thought I could handle it, keep it separate, use his influence. But then," she trailed off, one hand drifting to her stomach, a gesture that twisted the knife deeper. He stared at her, the woman he'd vowed forever to, now a stranger carrying another man's child. Her sobs filled the room, loud and broken, but he couldn't move, couldn't comfort her. "I need air," he said, grabbing his keys from the counter. She called after him, "Daniel, please," but he was already out the door, rain lashing his face as he stumbled to his car. He drove into the night, her words looping in his head. "He promised me the promotion. The storm swallowed his tears, and he wondered how love could turn to ash so fast. Daniel didn't come home that night. He drove until the dashboard glowed with the gas warning, the rain a relentless curtain blurring the world beyond his windshield. He ended up at a diner off I-5, a flickering neon sign promising open 24/7. The place smelled of grease and stale coffee, the waitress a woman with tired eyes and a name tag reading Barbary filling his mug without a word as he stared into the black liquid, replaying Lila's confession. Was this a deal? A baby for a title? The thought made his stomach churn, the coffee turning bitter on his tongue. Ethan's face floated in his mind, those sharp features, that smug confidence, and Daniel couldn't tell if he hated her more or the man who'd wormed into their lives. Dawn crept in, gray and damp, when he finally dragged himself back to the house. The kitchen was as he'd left it, lasagna congealed on the plates, her chair still upright where he'd righted it in a daze. But Lila was gone. A note sat on the counter, her handwriting jagged and rushed. I need time. I'm sorry. He checked her closet, half her clothes missing, hangers swaying empty. Her laptop was gone too, the desk bare where it usually sat. He sank onto the couch, staring at the wall where their wedding photo hung, her in a simple white dress, radiant, him grinning like he'd won the lottery. The frame was crooked now, a hairline crack spidering across the glass. He didn't fix it. Days blurred into a haze of takeout boxes and sleepless nights. He couldn't work, his sketches stayed blank, his clients' emails piling up unanswered. He'd pace the house, tracing the ghosts of their life, the dent in the couch from her spot, the coffee mug she'd chipped when they moved in, the ultrasound photo they'd taped to the fridge years ago, back when they'd lost a pregnancy early and held each other through the grief. Now she was carrying Ethan's kid, and he was alone. Then, a week later, his phone pinged with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the Driftwood Cafe. We need to talk, Evie. His blood ran cold. Ethan Voss, reaching out like some corporate puppet master pulling strings. Daniel almost deleted it, but curiosity or rage won out. The Driftwood Cafe was a trendy spot downtown, all exposed wood beams and overpriced lattes, the kind of place that screamed Ethan's vibe. Daniel found him in a corner booth, impeccable in a navy blazer, sipping an espresso like he was posing for a magazine. His silver-flecked hair caught the light, his posture relaxed but calculated, a predator at ease. Daniel, Ethan began, voice smooth as polished stone. I know this looks bad. Sit. Let me explain. Explain how you slept with my wife. Daniel snapped, sliding into the booth, fists balled under the table to keep from lunging across it. Ethan didn't flinch, his cool blue eyes steady. It wasn't personal. Lila's brilliant, hands down the best candidate for the job. She was under pressure, drowning in deadlines and board expectations. I offered guidance, and I crossed a line. The baby wasn't part of the plan. Plan? Daniel leaned forward, voice a low growl. What plan? Ethan set his cup down with a deliberate clink, folding his hands. Vortex is a Shark Tank, sink or swim, no in between. Lila wanted the edge, the kind of leverage that gets you noticed in a room full of suits. I offered mentorship, influence, doors she couldn't open alone. Things escalated: late nights, too much wine, a moment of weakness. She thinks this secures her spot, but I never demanded it. So you're saying she chose this? She's ambitious, Ethan said, shrugging, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. You know that better than anyone. She's got a fire most people only dream of. I didn't force her hand. She ran toward the flame. Daniel's mind reeled. Ethan was too slick, every word a dodge, a half-truth wrapped in charm. He wanted to hit him, to wipe that smug look off his face, but he stood instead, chair scraping loud enough to turn heads. Stay away from her, he said, and walked out, rain streaking his jacket as he drove home, Ethan's voice looping. She ran toward the flame. Back at the house, he couldn't let it go. He cracked Lila's old laptop password, still Carter, 2017, a relic of happier days. Her work email was a goldmine. Months of messages with Ethan, starting flirty jokes about office coffee, late-night banter, then turning calculated. The board will eat this up, Ethan wrote in one. Family woman, dedicated leader, perfect optics for the launch. Another, keep it quiet, and we both win. A plan to spin the pregnancy as a PR move, Lila's replies hesitant but complicit. This better work. He tracked her to a Marriott downtown, banging on her door until she opened it, eyes red and swollen, hair a wild tangle. He shoved the printouts at her, pages fluttering to the carpet. You traded our marriage for a job. She crumpled, sinking to her knees, sobbing. I didn't trade anything. I love you, Daniel. Ethan made it sound like the only way secure the promotion, stabilize us, give us a future. I was stupid, desperate, drowning in pressure. I thought I could play his game and win. Desperate enough to have his kid. It wasn't supposed to happen. She yelled, voice raw. I thought I could control it, get the job, fix us later. One night, too much wine, and I lost everything. I'm so sorry. She reached for him, but he stepped back, her hands grasping air. He walked away, her sobs fading behind the slammed door, torn between rage and a hollow pity he couldn't shake. Daniel didn't look back after that night. He hired a lawyer the next day, a brusque woman named Karen who chain-smoked outside her office and promised a clean break. The divorce papers were signed in a sterile conference room, Lila's signature shaky beside his, the ink still wet when he packed his life into a U-Haul and drove south to Portland. He rented a cramped studio above a bakery, the smell of sourdough drifting up each morning a small anchor in the chaos. The place was bare at first, just a mattress and a folding chair, but he filled it slowly, a desk for his sketches, a second-hand couch, a coffee pot that gurgled like the one back home. He threw himself into freelancing, sketching logos for startups and posters for local bands, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind quiet. Lila's texts came sporadically, apologies, please, updates he didn't ask for, I miss you, I'm scared, the baby's kicking. He'd read them in the dark, thumb hovering over reply, then delete them, the ache to raw to face. He'd see her in everything, the curve of a mug, the rain on his window, and hate himself for it. Months later, he stumbled across her on Vortex's website while researching a client. Lila Carter, senior manager, the headline blared, her photo polished and professional, a faint smile on her lips. The article gushed about her role in the AI launch, mentioning her new son in passing, no father named, just a glossy footnote. She'd had the baby, a boy, and gotten her prize. The image burned into him, her in a sleek blazer, standing where she'd always wanted, while he pieced himself back together in a city that didn't know their story. Portland became his refuge. He'd walk the riverfront at dusk, sketching the bridges, the water a mirror for the sky's fading light. He dated a little. There was Mia, a barista with a crooked smile who'd doodle hearts on his coffee cups. They'd spend weekends at food trucks or thrift stores, her laugh a balm to his wounds. But it fizzled when she moved to Boise for a job. You're still healing, she'd said, and he couldn't argue. Lila lingered like a bruise, tender under every touch. Then, one night, his phone rang at 2 a.m., the screen flashing her number. He almost ignored it, the clock's red glow taunting him, but her voice, raw, panicked, pulled him in when he answered. Ethan's blackmailing me, she said, words tumbling fast. He's threatening to tell the board I seduced him for the job, ruin me, unless I stay quiet about his affairs. He's got other women, Daniel, a whole trail of them, and I'm the scapegoat. Why tell me? He asked, voice cold, the old wound splitting open. Because you're the only one I trust, she said, and he heard the crack in her, the fear beneath the words. He wanted to hang up, to leave her to drown in the mess she'd made, but something held him, memory, pity, a flicker of the love he couldn't kill. They met days later in his studio. She looked thinner, her eyes hollowed out, her hair pulled into a messy bun. She slid a photo across his desk. Noah, her son, maybe 6 months old, with Ethan's sharp cheekbones and her dark curls. It hit him like a punch, seeing the proof of her betrayal in flesh. She handed him a USB next, trembling. Recordings, texts, everything. He's been threatening me since the birth, says he'll destroy me if I talk. You kept all this? He asked, turning the drive in his fingers. I had to, she said, voice low. He's a snake, always has been. I was too blind to see it until it was too late. Against every instinct screaming to walk away, he helped her. They spent nights combing through the files, Ethan's voice on grainy audio, smooth and menacing. Keep your mouth shut, Lila, or you're done. Text promising ruin if she didn't play along. Daniel leaked it to TechBit, a scrappy blog run by a friend from college who loved a good scoop. The story exploded online. Vortex VP's affair scandal rocks tech giant. Headlines screamed about Ethan's trail of coercion, his resignation a hasty footnote as Vortex's stock plummeted. Lila stepped down too, her name vanishing from the company's site, her career a casualty of the fallout. Daniel watched it unfold from Portland, a bitter satisfaction settling in his chest. He'd torn down the man who'd wrecked his life, but the victory felt hollow. Lila was still gone, and he was still alone. Life crept forward in Portland, slow and steady, like the river that wound through the city. Daniel's studio became a home over time. Plants sprouted on the sill, their leaves brushing the glass. Sketches covered the walls. A gallery of his healing. A bookshelf sagged under paperbacks he'd picked up at Powell's. He freelanced for bigger clients, now at agencies. Indie filmmakers. His name whispered in creative circles as the guy who gets it done. The bakery downstairs became his morning ritual, the owner slipping him free croissants with a wink, calling him the quiet artist upstairs. He dated here and there, testing the waters. After Mia, there was Sarah, a photographer with wild red hair who dragged him to art galleries, her energy a whirlwind he couldn't keep up with. Then came Jun, a quiet librarian who'd read him poetry over coffee, her voice soft as rain. Neither lasted. Sarah said he was too guarded, Jun that he carried too much past. They weren't wrong. Lila stayed a shadow, surfacing in dreams where they'd argue in their old kitchen, or kiss under the Cascades pines, or just sit in silence, her hand in his. He'd wake with her name on his lips, the $8 but never gone. In Seattle, Lila raised no alone. Her apartment was a small, cluttered space in Capitol Hill, blocks from Vortex's gleaming tower, a world away from her old life. Toys littered the floor, plastic trucks and stuffed bears tripping her as she moved. Her laptop sat closed on a shelf, gathering dust. Her career, once a blazing star, was a memory she didn't touch. She'd pour her energy into Noah's first steps, his babbling words, his dark curls bouncing as he ran. But at night, when he slept, she'd sit by the window, staring at the city lights, and write letters to Daniel. Pages of regret, apologies, love. I lost myself chasing what I thought mattered. I'd trade it all to have you back. She never sent them, the envelopes stacking up in a drawer, a quiet confession to no one. Years passed, the edges of their story softening. Daniel visited Seattle one spring for a client pitch, the city's damp air stirring memories he'd buried. Walking through a park near Lake Union, he spotted her, Noah, now 4, racing down a slide, his laughter sharp and bright. She sat on a bench, watching him, her face softer, lines etched where ambition had once burned. She wore a faded jacket, her hair loose, and she looked lighter, somehow, like she'd shed the weight of Vortex and Ethan and all the lies. Their eyes met across the grass, a jolt passing through him. She froze, lips parting, then offered a small, hesitant nod. He nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of pain, of survival, of the space they'd carved apart. No words passed between them. Noah called her mama, look, and she turned, smiling at him, a real smile Daniel hadn't seen in years. He watched a moment longer, then turned away, heading back to his rental car, the park's chatter fading behind him. The ache was there, a quiet hum, but it didn't own him anymore. He drove to Portland that night, the highway stretching dark and endless, and felt something like peace, subtle and fragile, hard won, but his. Lila stayed on the bench, Noah's hand in hers as he babbled about the slide. She watched Daniel disappear into the crowd, a pang twisting her chest, but she didn't call out. She'd broken them, chasing a dream that turned to ash, and now she lived with the pieces: her son, her guilt, her small, steady life. Their story was done, messy and broken, but done. She squeezed Noah's hand, leading him home, the city lights flickering like stars she'd once reached for and lost. And that's the end of this story. Give this video a like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next videos. See you in the next one.